Welcome to Search for Signs. My name is Gary Willing. If this information interests you, please press the like and subscribe button and press the bell for notifications. A little over a month ago, I interviewed a good friend of mine, Marc, who is very knowledgeable about some of the things going on politically in the world. We talked about the Iranian crisis, I think, and kind of tied it into this whole story. And I wanted to bring you back on this YouTube channel to talk a little bit more about what's going on politically in this country and so forth, and maybe even touch on the coronavirus and the stock market woes over the past few weeks, and kind of tie it into this story and
Sure.
why Maitreya is on TV, and how is that affecting anything in terms of the world scene and all that kind of thing. So, anywho,
Right.
Marc, so what? Let me ask you this. Let's start off like this. What is your take on the coronavirus? What do you think? Do you think it's serious?
I think it's serious. It's, everything is relative.
Uh-huh.
I think primarily humanity has to understand that there's a connection between its psychological stress, its poor behavior or its poor demeanor, and physical outcomes of these things. And what I mean by that is you have a world where hundreds of millions of people are stressed beyond the max, working, trying to survive, some not even being able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And this generates a tension, it generates a stress, it generates a disharmony and a discord that eventually makes itself known on the physical plane as an illness or as some sort of imbalance,
Mm-hmm.
And part of what this points to is that we don't seem to understand yet that we're one family, and we can like it, we can not like it. We're one human family. And so consequently, when we allow, as we continually have over the decades, some portion of that family to just live in absolute destitution, to live in absolute poverty, to be denied even the basic essentials of life, we're very naive to think that that isn't going to play out and express itself in all kinds of oblique ways, including causing illness. We obviously know it's a contributing cause of terrorism, to war, to disharmony of all kinds. So if you stop and think about all that stress that is created by our living conditions in the world, then it seems fairly obvious to me that eventually it's going to express itself. And look at what has happened with the coronavirus. Then all of a sudden something starts and it seems to spread. And then I'm not alarmist about it. I think that it's reasonable to be prudent about it, but I'm not totally alarmist about it. But it does spread, and it's spreading all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
And the other aspect of it is, of course, because of our economic system. The people in the pharmaceutical companies have seen their stocks shoot through the roof as a response to this. Well, that's a big problem too. They're, again, essentially, they may be providing essential services, but they're profiteering on what has become an international health crisis. And it's obvious that it would help them profit, but that just points again to a system that's so entirely rigged that, in my view, it just leads to a great deal of unnecessary stress, tension, and then there are these outbreaks of disease and illness, which are in part caused by them.
Yeah, good point. And then, how it's affecting the stock market as well. In this country, I don't know what it's been doing to the global stock markets, but I just know, the United States, they're pinning all these. Do you think that the stock market woes are really having to do with people's fear of the coronavirus, or do you think something else is going on?
It's hard to tell. What's easy to tell is that the stock market is a rigged casino game to begin with and to end with. So with rigged casino games, who knows how they're rigged, and who knows really who is pulling the strings behind the scenes and what is causing what. We had a huge drop in the stock market, then there was a big record-breaking uptick for one day, and then it's going to fluctuate. But the stock market itself is an artificial contrivance, and even major economists know this. It's just a rigged con, whereby most of the wealth is cyber wealth. It's not connected to anything real in the world. It's just, exotic investment interests, exotic investment instruments compounded by more exotic investment instruments, a lot of sort of duplicity, a lot of exaggerated values, a lot of inflated merit, and it's just a big con to begin with and to end with, and it's a con that is sustained and energized by the very smallest percent of the world's population. Those people who are so wealthy that they can have some effect on this. When I see the stock market going down and then climbing back up by 1,200 points, my first thought is that somebody pumped a great deal of capital in it to keep it afloat, because perhaps allowed to fail on its own term, it would have tanked even further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And let me ask you this. So as long as you've known the story of Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom, what is Maitreya's view on commercialization in the stock market? What does he think is behind the pump, as you talk about, pumping capital into it? And, is it beneficial for humanity to have a stock market running the world, or is it not?
I would say, according to Maitreya, absolutely not, just the opposite.
Yeah.
Years ago, he said market forces are the forces of division, and consequently they're the forces of evil, because they sow division within the human race, and it refers us back to our essential unity. We can like or not like the essential unity of the human race. Until we recognize it fully and act as if we recognize it, we're going to continue to suffer. It's just that simple.
So it kind of goes hand in hand with what you're talking about with the coronavirus and the stress and the economic divisions and so forth. And so everything is kind of at its apex in terms of the division in the world, right? Is that what you're kind of saying?
I am. And as you will recall, the one centerpiece of Maitreya's platform, if you will, for decades now has been sharing. Sharing, and just an equitable redistribution of the food and the resources of the world, so that hundreds of millions, even billions of people don't have to live in dire, abject poverty. That is inconsistent with the dignity of living as a human being. And as Maitreya points out, these people are beset by this tragedy simply because they're born in a certain part of the world, whereas they're not born in another part of the world, And, there are other contributing factors, but once again, it points to, in my view, the absolute essential unity of the human race. And to the degree that we refuse to recognize that, that is the degree to which we will continue to have war and separation and terrorism and discord and disease and disharmony. Because those symptoms are telling us that we are violating the very fundamental principles of life on the planet, the very fundamental reality of life on this planet.
How does that tie into your view of what's going on with the Democratic primary between the two front-running candidates, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden? Which one do you think is more in line with perhaps what Maitreya's priorities are, and to kind of tie it all in together with that?
Sure. Well, firstly, going back a bit, the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, 1948, as you know, Gary, Article 25 stipulates that every man, woman, and child on this planet has the right to adequate food, shelter, health care, basic education, and security in old age. Maitreya's priorities are very consistent with that.
Mm-hmm.
Food, healthcare, education, sustainable living, shelter, and security in old age. So those things being true, it's obvious that there's one candidate and one candidate only who is not only calling for those things now, but has spent the last 40 years calling for those things, and that candidate is obviously Bernie Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a political endorsement, although, if you take a look at the Sanders campaign, which has, as it has unfolded over the last 8 to 10 months, you see him taking aim at all of the things that are obstructions to justice: the military-industrial complex, the prison-industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industry, the healthcare industry, the mainstream media, the
fossil fuel companies, right?
Thank you. The fossil fuel companies. I mean, correctly viewed, all of these
Wall
industries
Street,
or all of these concerns. Wall Street, sure. How many? We have $21 trillion hid in offshore accounts, in tax shelters offshore worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it? So, when we talk about roads and infrastructure, health care for all, a quality public education, quality social safety nets, clean environment. I mean, Sanders is the one candidate who has had the extraordinary courage just to flat out say it, just to
mm-hmm.
call it as it is, And it seems to me that in the things that he advocates, he's pretty much completely consistent with Maitreya's priorities.
Do you think he might be a little too progressive for Americans right now, or do you think there's a chance that he could win the election?
I think that Americans may be a little too regressive for him, but he has been mischaracterized repeatedly in the MSM. We hear about how he's a communist. He's not.
Sure.
He's a socialist. Correctly understood, Sanders is an FDR-style New Deal Democrat for the 21st century. So those who say that he's not a real Democrat are comical, because in a certain sense, he's the only real Democrat running. If you consider the principles of the Democratic Party to be consistent with what FDR laid out, and even Eisenhower and Truman and JFK and Johnson domestically followed up on him, being, and that's when the United States had a very viable middle class, and we were really a strong, we had a strong middle class economy, and people had jobs and lives, and not that it was perfect, but you didn't see the discrepancies and the disparities that you see now.
I know when people talk about healthcare and they talk, oh my gosh, you're going to tax the crap out of us and stuff. I have health insurance through my employer, like most people in the United States, right? Well, last year I spent $9,000 on health insurance premiums, and I'm still worried to go to the doctor because I'd still have to pay out of pocket up to $10,000 more for for any kind of, before even my coverage even kicks in. It's that expensive,
Right.
And it's just, I'd rather just get taxed, and just walk into a doctor, take care of what I need to take care of, and turn around and walk out, But
well,
they always propagate that fear kind of thing. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No. You go right ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
The thing is that you, among many people, myself included, are underinsured. So consequently, if something should happen to me at my present level, I have to come up with the first $6,500 as a copay. Then it kicks in, and only for various things. All of this is so complicated, and indeed, Sanders has been forthright. The taxes will go up, but everybody will end up saving hugely, because copays and premiums and all these other intermediary costs are going to go down. And by the way, when we stop and look at the yearly salaries plus stock bonuses of the CEOs of healthcare insurance companies, and knocking down $21 million, $24 million here, $14 million here. I mean, this kind of executive class is very generous in doling itself out maximum benefits. But then how many times have you heard, Gary, in fact, you even just alluded to it yourself, people don't go to the doctor when they should because they think, I can't afford it. Or when they do go to the doctor, they go there and they think their insurance will cover it, and their insurance doesn't cover it. It's all of a sudden, I'm sorry, we don't cover that. Or there's some variation of that, you know.
Oh,
the
absolutely.
most serious thing is that people say, well, I'm not going to the doctor because I can't afford it. And then 2-3 years later down the line, and Sanders points out that this is why we spend by far the most money needlessly on health care, then you go to the doctor 2-3 years down the line, maybe when you should have gone 3 years before, your problem is that much worse, and then it's that much more difficult to solve. So it's more costly to solve, but much more important than how much it costs. You know, what about the human dimension there?
Mm-hmm.
I should have gone to the doctor at this point, but I waited 3 years because I couldn't afford it. So what happens to me in that 3 years? Perhaps my illness gets worse. You have, as you know, you have diabetics rationing their insulin, and in some cases dying because they're rationing their insulin because they can't afford the monthly cost of a full complement or a full dosage of insulin. Okay? Insulin, a drug that has been around for decades. It has been the known treatment for diabetes for decades. It is pennies to produce, and people are still, you know, sacrificing their proper dosages because they can't afford it. I mean, it's how ridiculous can we possibly be here?
That's like I was just listening on the news. Speaking of the coronavirus, there was a couple that were, or the guy actually, he was quarantined. He was forced quarantined.
Yeah.
And then he gets this huge bill by the hospital. He was like, I thought the government was paying for this. I wasn't even asking to be quarantined. You know, they were requiring that I do it. And you know how now he's got this several $1,000s hospital bill for just being quarantined.
Right. Unbelievable.
It's like, hey, there you go, Merry Christmas. You know, but we're running short on time, Mark. Can we continue this conversation in another interview?
Yes, Gary, that would be fine, and thank you. Thank you for your careful questioning, and thanks for the opportunity. And I enjoyed speaking with you as always.
Yeah, we'll look forward to talking to you really soon, Mark. Thanks.
All right.
Have a great day. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.